Hi everyone, I'm Éanna, contributing editor with Sifted, and if you don't know Sifted, we're a news company in London. Welcome to the session. Please tell me that everyone else had trouble fitting back into their suits. It's been a while. I still have the lockdown weight, unfortunately. Unlike myself though, European tech is fighting fit at the moment. Tech is emerging from the pandemic lean and mean. And it's benefited enormously from the accelerated shift to digital we've seen in the last year and a half. Lack of venture capital used to be the top complaint of founders, but there's loads of it now. Europe is better capitalized than ever. European tech firms are pulling in far larger sums of money per investment than they used to. And I think 2021 is on course for a record year of funding as well. So it all sounds pretty good. But I think we should stand back a little bit as well and think about whether the right sums of money are going to the right startups. So we're going to talk today about who's up and who's down on funding. We're going to hear practical experiences, practical tips from our founders on stage. We're also going to go the other side of the investment table. We're going to talk to investors on what founders should be bringing to the table, how they should prepare for meeting VCs. And I think we'll also consider if the momentum of VC funding is sustainable or whether there's a bubble here that's ready to burst. So, joining me today to talk about some of these issues, we have Yoram Wijngaarde. He's founder and CEO of Dealroom in Amsterdam. We have Emily Meads. She's a deep tech investor at Speed Invest, the Austrian VC firm. We have Robert Merino, he's CEO of Qubit Pharmaceuticals in Paris. We have Théau Peronnin, he's co-founder and CEO of Alice&Bob, a company in Paris which is building a quantum computer, quantum hardware. And we have Willem Jonker, he's CEO of EIT Digital. So, to set the scene, we're going to go to Yoram. He's a good partner in crime of Sifted. He's going to kick off and speak to us about the direction of travel of European VC. Thank you.
Thank you, Éanna. This is Yoram Wijngaarde. I'm the founder of Dealroom, and I'm just going to set the scene for the next 10 minutes before we go back into the panel. So I've presented some data for today about how to navigate what's probably the greatest ever tech boom there ever has been. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on Europe's tech ecosystem and also talk about how deep tech, and I think that we have two amazing founders here on stage who are deep tech founders, how that is different and how to make sense of all the money that's being invested right now. So navigating the greatest ever tech boom. One way to see the crazy times that we're in is to just look at the NASDAQ index. So the top 100 companies that are in the NASDAQ are together worth 23 trillion. You can see like a small blip in 2008, which was like the banking crisis. And before that, you can see also in the beginning a blip that was like the dot-com crash. And it just seems like insignificant compared to where we are now. If you look at startups that have been created since 1990, together they're worth 22 trillion in enterprise value. And what you can also see is that the most recent cohorts of those are actually creating the most value. That's the red part. That's startups that have been founded since 2010 are responsible for about half of that, so about $10 trillion. And of course, part of what's like driving all that surge in valuations is venture capital, which is completely crushing previous records. So this year, almost 600 billion will be invested in startups worldwide. So it's just enormous numbers. And of course, because of that, unicorns are being created everywhere. Here you can see some selection of geographies. I just picked a few. India, which is booming, New York. China is a little bit tapering off, but Europe is accelerating, and so is Silicon Valley, Bay Area. And this year, about 2 unicorns were created every day. So that's like also staggering statistic. And so here comes kind of the good news for Europe is this tech boom is not happening only in Silicon Valley. It's actually spreading across the world. And there are now 170 cities worldwide that have 1 or more unicorn, and of which 65 are in Europe. So Europe has actually the most unicorn cities. And why do we care about that? Because once a city is able to produce 1 unicorn, it's usually a sign that the ecosystem there is flourishing. This is one of my favorite slides at the moment, because it shows how important venture-backed entrepreneurship is becoming for the whole economy. So it's not just about startups or the startup ecosystem, it's about the economy. In the Bay Area, 68% of jobs are at VC-backed companies. In all of the US, it's 24%. The EU still has a long way to go. It's less than 2%. So Europe's share also of global venture capital is now at an all-time high. In China, so basically venture capital is kind of shifting from China to Europe. And Europe's share of global venture capital is now almost 18%, which is roughly the same as its share of global GDP. So zooming in on Europe. So the European startups ecosystem is combined worth about 3 trillion, which is the combined valuation of all startups founded since 1990. And investment in European startups is close to hitting 100 billion this year, which is just a number that was not, you could not imagine that just 2 years ago. It's the same amount that was invested in the US, in all of the US, just a few years ago. So when I was working on this presentation, I saw those numbers and I actually was quite surprised, and I immediately shared it on social media. And this got shared a lot by VC firms, and one of them was Christoph Jans, who maybe you know, he's a pretty prominent investor in Point9. Point9 is the firm that he set up. It's one of the most prominent seed investors in Europe that has invested in, I think, 11 unicorns. So not someone you would see on Dragon's Den or something like that. And he kind of made a really nice summary of where we are. So, of course, the market is a bit overheated. Startups are getting overfunded. Some will scale prematurely. A lot of money will be lost. But net, it's a positive for Europe. And I think that's right, because if you look at what happened in Silicon Valley just in the dot-com boom, a lot of companies crashed and burned, but some of the most powerful companies like Google, Amazon also come from that era. So in Europe, most of the action is happening in the UK, Germany, France, but it's really spreading across Europe, so that's good to see. They're still getting funded mostly from the US and the Asia, and actually increasingly are getting funded from the US and Asia. So European investors should really step up. And then so to kind of finish my presentation, and we can go into the panel, is, okay, so how is deep tech different? And how can deep tech benefit from all that money that's going around? Does it mean that it's easy to raise? So the thing about deep tech is that it combines 2 types of risks. So there is engineering and scientific risk, and there's product market risk. So a normal startup doesn't have engineering and scientific risk. It uses existing technology. And a biotech startup doesn't have product market risk because there's always a market for new medicine. But they have the scientific risk. But if you combine both, that's deep tech. So why on earth would you do something like that? So, and because of that, deep tech companies scale differently. So they have a longer ramp up and than a regular startup, and also than a biotech startup. There's more R&D going on. And so because of that, what deep tech companies often do is they start in the university, and they also depend on some early support from government grants. So that's why I think, in a nutshell, the EIC initiative is really critical to get those deep tech companies off the ground. And you can see lots of examples here about why that works. The great example is BioNTech, which for the first about 10 years of its existence didn't have any traction yet in the market because it was just not ready, and people were not even that interested in this mRNA platform, and you know what happened then. But there are tons of others like IQM, Onfido, Exscientia, that's using also AI-based drug discovery, that recently went public. So it takes a bit more time to build a deep tech startup, but the rewards are there, and the risks get shared. And actually the graduation rates of deep tech startups, so the success rate over the long run, is the same as with normal startups. And even deep tech startups in the current market are scaling faster than before. So the average time to becoming a unicorn has gone down. And also the path to exit has vastly improved. So there's many more routes to exit a deep tech company now than there was just 5 years ago, including SPACs, IPOs. So there's much more room for them to take a long-term view and get really big. And actually, university-affiliated startups in Europe combined are worth over 150 billion, so that just shows that there is a massive potential and that this is a very interesting segment for investors. So that's it. And I think during the panel we can talk more about, is there a bubble, and is it so easy to raise? So I don't think so. It's actually still quite hard. And the hotness of the market is concentrated around just a few deals. So that can be quite confusing for founders, but looking forward to discuss it.
Thank you, Yoram. Brilliant. Oh yeah, why not? Brilliant. Deserves a clap. So yes, as we can see from Yoram's presentation, there's big piles of money spinning around Europe, looking for places to land. And I was speaking to a guy in the coffee area here yesterday, and he works in the energy sector, and he works with hardware. And he told me he's had a hard time with investors so far, that it's hard to get them interested in hardware. As far as he's concerned, investors, what he said is they're Me Too's, they like hopping on bandwagons. That was his view, not mine. I think journalists are certainly guilty of hopping on bandwagons. But maybe I'll turn to one of our founders now, to Robert. I imagine quantum is an easy topic to get investors excited in at the moment. What's your experience been?
I think Théau will agree. A lot of people are very interested in quantum. And the reason I would say some of them are interested is because their LPs ask them, I heard that quantum is a hot topic. What is your quantum strategy? So they have to look on the internet and, we know that company, we're in discussion with this company. So most of the time, they are interested in quantum because LPs are interested in quantum. But for them, it's very hard to understand clearly what it is, what it will bring, what value to expect, and when to expect something. And that's probably one of the major issues that we have, is that they are evaluating deep tech companies often with the same metrics as what they would do with SaaS companies, like what is your customer traction? How many people are willing to sign for a proof of concept or whatever? How many new customers do you have? What is your monthly revenue, etc. Asking this to companies that are still at the R&D stage, it cannot fit. So yes, a lot of interest. but they need to learn what KPIs to use in order to evaluate the companies. So a lot of people are interested, but I'm not that sure that there will be a lot in the end that will really support the development of the quantum ecosystem. Know what you think, Théau, on that?
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, quantum is most likely the most deep tech at the moment. And the entry barrier for VCs to judge the assets of an early stage quantum company is quite high. I mean, if you're on the other side of the table, it's very challenging to estimate how credible is the roadmap, what are the assets to date, how valuable those are. And so there are just a handful of VCs well equipped to deal with those kinds of deals, that's for sure.
And I think also the key problem in quantum is expertise. So we already as companies struggle to hire people, the proper ones. So when VCs try to find experts to support the due diligence, for instance, they often end up in a pitfall that is the experts are either a senior advisory member to the startups they want to invest in, or competitors because they have their own startup. So of course they will not say that the startup is good. So that's another issue. When you are in a very niche and scientific complex markets, then finding the proper people is very hard.
Yeah, quantum labor pool is quite small, I guess, at the moment. But we have one of these investors on the line, I think. We have Emily. Maybe she will tell us a little bit about how she assesses these companies, the difficulties she has, because it's unproven technology. I wonder what your method is like, if you want to tell us.
Yeah, sure. Happy to give a little bit of insight. I think I'm probably quite a unique case because I took it upon myself to do a master's in quantum technologies to be able to try to do the due diligence myself. So I think it's actually really, really important to have that scientific credibility and be able to do some of it yourself. Of course, I'm not an expert. I don't have a PhD in the subject matter, and even if I did, it would be a very small part of the quantum stack. But I agree that the difficulty of finding talent for startups is the same on the deep tech side of things from investors' point of view. We're all looking at the same pool of people, and it's still quite a small ecosystem. So I can see, and it has happened before, where it's challenging to find like a neutral and objective point of view. But I think that this is also not so specific to quantum. I think there's a whole upskilling that needs to happen for deep tech investors in general. Like you do, I think, need to expect some technical capabilities from investors today. And it's going to take a little bit of time before that upskilling happens. Like if we think about how long deep tech has been hot for and is getting a lot of funding, it's on the scale of a few years. So it's all very young and new. And I think, the VC side of the table needs to make more effort, and founders also need to give the ecosystem a little bit of time to catch up with this expertise. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on this.
Thank you, Emily. We have Willem on the line as well, and I want to make sure to come to him. Willem, you must see it all the time with digital technologies where they go in and out of favor. It was blockchain for a while, now it's probably the metaverse that everyone wants to hear about. I'd love to get a perspective from you on, what startups should do. Should they try and align themselves with these cool new things like the metaverse, or should they just concentrate on their own thing? Well, I think you're muted.
Sorry, thanks very much for having me here. The system indicates indeed that I was muted, so much for technology. First of all, a very nice presentation. And of course, the presentation takes the angle from the investor. And that's one angle on the overall issue. The other angle is, of course, the technology itself. Then it was already mentioned. Do we have the talent available? And then, of course, please do not forget the market, because you may go with high valuation for quite a while without having revenues, but one day somebody will knock the door and say, hey, where are the revenues now? So it's those four elements that are important. What makes deep tech harder is that market traction and technology risks, as you rightfully indicated, are there, but also, do you have the talent? Because you can run into certain technology problems that really requires a lot of expertise, creativity, research to get over it. And in the end, I mean, of course, if you want access to a lot of money, you do see a tendency of overinvestment in a certain area that becomes very popular. You mentioned blockchain, artificial intelligence, of course, is an example of that, and quantum may also be another one. On the end, if you have a company, of course, you should do where you are good at. And for me, a good example of a very successful European deep tech company is ASML from the Netherlands. And if you look at how that company evolved and developed itself and became the most valuable digital company in Europe, you see it's a long journey. It originated actually from a corporate R&D center, being Philips, rather than from a university. It benefited enormously from being well connected in the semiconductors world for its access to market. And it also was supported with corporate finance when things were difficult and nobody wanted to invest. So in the end, this story tells that valuation, easy access to large amounts of VC in deep tech is maybe the game is a little bit different here. So you look, do I have the talent pool? Do I have good inroads to the market? Because deep tech markets are far more difficult to penetrate sometimes than consumer markets. And when it comes to investors, you know what you need is very good analytics. You don't have to be a domain expert, but you have to have very good analytics skills. Is the story that I'm being told by the experts really true? And is it really valid? Because experts are experts, but also on a limited domain very often. And they have a certain view on the world. And you should always be critical whether these stories really are logical, whether you really understand the logic behind it and not are just impressed by all the deep technology and think, oh, I don't understand it, so the expert will probably be right. So why not go for it? So I really like the remark saying I did a master's in quantum to really, I want to understand what I'm doing. And I think that is with deep tech important, not to be an expert, but to understand the arguments of the experts. And I've witnessed that myself when I was responsible for a part of R&D in Philips in my previous job. And we had the best and brightest people. And they were always right on their subject, but they were not always right on the potential success of their technology in the market. And their arguments were not always valid when it came to that, because it was outside their domain. So you should not be, and of course, when you start a venture, you need to sell the whole package to the investors. You need to sell that you have great technology, you have great people, and you have great access to the market. But that should be very well analyzed. And let's also be honest, I mean, you can analyze until eternity. Some of these things are simply hard to predict. I mean, quantum computing, it's a clear disruption, absolutely. It has a potential. However, there are still quite a few elements to get scalable quantum computers sitting on the desk. So, and will those fundamental issues be solved? Yes or no? And the jury is out to a certain extent.
Thank you, Willem. Well, yeah, I'd love to hear more about this quantum journey. I'd love to ask our two founders how it's going, because I talk to experts sometimes and they say it's very hard to predict when we're going to have a usable quantum technology. But I want to hear about your journeys.
So I guess this one is for me. So, as a hardware player, so just to say a couple of words about the journey. So Alice&Bob is 18 months old. We so far raised 5 million euros to French VCs, Elia and Brega. We're a spin-off of several French labs, CNRS, CEA, Nubria. And what we're doing is we're exactly trying to solve this problem of having reliable quantum computers that actually delivers this exponential speed up to enable Robert to do the drug discovery with it, basically. And so the journey is quite interesting because it's still very early stage R&D, and yet the stakes are huge. The impact of quantum computing is in the hundreds of billions of dollars, and the competitors are quite formidable. I mean, we're competing head-to-head with Google, IBM. We have Amazon following suit on our technology, and it's about a race to deliver that technology soon enough to answer the needs and capture. Because something that I think is quite unique to deep tech is the entry barrier. And this is one of the most interesting things is this kind of journey, is that you are securing a spot in an ecosystem that would be very hard to claim for another player. There is a very limited skill pool, and if you capture this, we're also conquering IP and positioning ourselves as the key provider in those supply chain. So it's an interesting race, an interesting journey where you are both doing R&D and securing a spot in an extremely tense and valuable market at the same time.
Totally agree with you, Théau. I mean, we are users of massive computing power. Today, we are using classic computing, high-performance computers, and we are transitioning toward a quantum computer, the ones that are ready yet, and the one that will be ready soon, in order to be able to better design drugs, go faster, and completely switch from wet lab to computers, the way it has been done in automotive industry or aerospace. So that allows to go much faster and have better results, explainable results. The way we approach quantum computing, I have an issue with the way things are done in Europe when thinking about quantum computing most of the time, because people say there is classic computing and there is quantum computing, and we'll go from one to the other without transitioning, as if you had to oppose both of them. That's not what's going on. People are going to use classic computer probably forever, and in parallel they will use, and that's what we do, we also quantum computers for certain tasks. And that's probably an issue in terms of mindset that we have now in Europe, is to think, okay, quantum computing cannot succeed because there are so many issues in the scalability of quantum computers. Yes, there are issues. There were issues when we were developing planes, there were issues to develop faster train, etc. But there are also opportunities. And we think, and I think personally, that we can have a transition, nice and smooth transition, use quantum computers even today. There are some great European providers in quantum computers that bring computing power today to do small tasks that are very complex on classic computers, do them better. Of course, you don't solve the entire problem, but you solve some small problems. And time going on, you will solve bigger and bigger problems, and maybe eventually completely switch 90% of your workflow on quantum computers. So why is it important to start now? Because, well, others do. The money that is invested in quantum computer is massive, and it takes time. Switching from CPUs, the things that the processors that Intel developed in the past, to GPUs, the graphic card that NVIDIA developed, for instance, for computing, takes 5 to 10 years. Switching from GPUs to noisy intermediate quantum computing will take 5 to 10 years. Switching to fault-tolerant quantum computing will take 5 to 10 years. You have to develop the algorithmics, you have to develop everything. If you wait for the time the quantum computer is there to switch, you will be 10 years behind. So that's why you need to take risk. You need to invest in developing the algorithmics, the ecosystem, build strong partnerships with the hardware providers. With, of course, we are software developers. We use our own software to develop drugs. But I think it's very important to go now, because it will happen, just happen. And we cannot allow ourselves to be 10 or 20 years late when it will be ready.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm going to pull back a little bit here at this moment, and I want to bring in an outside perspective. I was listening to a podcast recently, and it featured Sun Microsystems co-founder Vinod Khosla. So he's a very successful guy in America, and he was talking about European venture capital And he was a little bit dismissive of efforts in Europe. I'll read you what he said. He said, Europe is too respectful of institutions. You need much more disrespect for authority. I find many European startups, if they have a big idea, it gets turned into a decent idea. So it gets downsized a little bit. It doesn't quite live up to expectations. So yeah, maybe I'll put this to Yoram, if you have any perspective on this. Do you think he has a point?
Yeah, I think he has a point. Definitely, like it's starting to change a bit, but we're definitely not there yet. He has a point.
He's right.
If you don't mind, I'd like to elaborate on that. The issue that we have here is that we need to ask for so much permission. You know, it's like, oh, that's very interesting. Let's do the due diligence. Wait, I have to ask for my committee, and the committee has to ask for another committee, and then we forgot about that question. So going back to the committee, etc., etc. Everything takes time. Everything, even whether you're looking for equity, for grant, for everything, it's so long. Really, so long. But the issue is that when compared to other ecosystems such as North America, China, or whatever, I think the key metric that we should keep in mind is not as much the level of funding, because we have people in the US, they cost me twice as much as in Europe. So if my competitor raises twice as much, in fact, they have the same amount of money than we do to achieve results. But they will go much faster. They will take maybe 3 months to raise, while it will take 9 months here or 12 months here. Just because here you need more validation, we think about everything that can go wrong, etc. I try to meet at least 2 clients and partners a week and hire at least 1 person a month to grow to make the company grow and succeed in what we want to do. Every time I miss 1 month, which means every time I have to pause for 1 month because I'm looking for money or looking for grant, giving more documentation or whatever, that means I give my competitors access to 8 to 10 more clients and hiring 1 person that I would hire. So 9 months, you can imagine what an edge we give to North American and Asian companies. And I think that's the key issue here. It's to go fast and just trust the founders. Make sure we go, we don't have that much questions administrative. When we want, let's take risk, let's move forward, let's go fast so that we can compete with other ecosystems.
Great, and I want to hear from Emily on this. Emily, if you're on the line still. Can we go a little bit quicker? Do you think it's a bit too slow? Venture capital is a game of speed. Can we go faster?
Yes, I think absolutely. I agree with both Robert and Yoram. I think we play it safe. We can try to be, a European Union, but we're not quite United States, so to say. And there are different incentives on a national scale and on a European scale, and trying to consolidate them all can close things down. And I think historically also Europe has a little bit of a bureaucratic administrative weight that it carries with it. And, it's well-intentioned, but I agree that it absolutely does slow it down. I'd be curious to know when the quote was given by the founder of Sun Microsystems, because I do also think we're doing a little bit better in the recent years. But I agree with both what Robert said, and I think that was a really good point, thinking about it in terms of the costs, to the competitors and how that really adds up very, very quickly over several months. So, agree.
And Éanna, I think what Vinod Khosla also means is the attitude of founders and VCs. So in the US, I think a founder would just break the rules and then figure it out later. And here we are too afraid of that. And I'm not saying some rules can't be broken, but if you look, for example, at how they scaled with scooters, and also Uber, they just went for it and they said, okay, we'll figure out the regulation afterwards. And here we try to first have everything in place before we scale. So I think it's a bit of both sides are guilty of it. And especially if you go to Italy, for example, Italian founders love to complain about how there's too much bureaucracy. But the bureaucracy in Germany is just as bad. And they complain, they also complain a bit about it, but they don't pretend like that's holding them back.
Théau, what kind of frustrations have you come up against dealing with investors?
No, I mean, it's. I was thinking when I was listening to the panel before this one, that maybe the difference we have is with North America is the relationship to standards, to things that should not be discussed, that are the usual practice of the field, and that we should not, at each conversation with the VC, have to discuss about exit possibilities. It's obvious for everyone how things goes, the level of dilution in a deal. I mean, those things are pretty standard, and thinking and overthinking those points actually is part of what slows down the process. And regarding the relationship to risk, there is a mindset about what is the position you're trying to capture, and how this will create a unique valuation versus the risk of being caught or limited by the regulation later on, or the limitation of physics or whatever are the rules you're breaking, not necessarily government-based rules. And I really think things are going in the right direction. I actually have little frustration in the sense that that there is definitely momentum pushing those things in the right direction. And now the question is, how can we do this change faster and be more bold and bring the whole ecosystem with us as we move forward, not just giving up on it and saying we'll move to North America like some of quantum companies in Europe did to get access to that fast funding and ambitious statements.
Thank you very much. I want to come back to Willem as well. I don't want to forget about you, Willem. You've been at EIT Digital for a long time, of course. Do you think it's getting a little bit better? Are companies able to scale more than they were in the past? And what kind of help are you giving them?
Yeah, I think the situation is definitely improving. It also shows from the graphs. At the same time, you see that in Europe, look at the graph that was shown on jobs. You see that in Europe, this is still a very small part of the economy. And of course, that influences the overall story. Nevertheless, I do fully agree we need to speed up. And it's not you go fast and take a lot of risk, and you go slow and there are no risks. I mean, that's absolutely not, for me, the right opposition between the two things. It's more about how do you organize decision making? And that's what you see. I mean, I think you quoted, if I remember well, the word institutionalized was mentioned. And I think that is a bit what you see in Europe, that we look a lot at established institutions for our R&D and for our innovation. And those institutions are large, have an enormous history, and that makes also very often decision-making complex. We're in Europe always need also to team up to get critical mass, and that slows things down. So I think what we have to find is more agility there in the decision making. I don't think that the risk assessment here is very much different, or that we are so cautious that we don't dare to step in new waters. Maybe a bit of that, but that's not the essence. The essence is that our decision making processes are very often pretty complex, take long as a result, because there are many parties involved. What you see much more here is a kind of combined public-private funding, which again requires a kind of alignment. At the same time, the graphs show that we are making progress here. I mean, we're here with the EIC. If I see the speed at which things are now going and compare that to where we were 10 years ago, I mean, you see an enormous difference, both in the processes, both in the agility and in the lining up, I would say, of public and private investments in this domain. That being said, we're still in the catch-up mode, of course. The good news about deep tech, I think, in the end, this is very much about having the technical talent available. right? And it's not just throwing money, and the problem will be solved. It's having the right people, the good institutions, and let them do it. We have that. I mean, we have in Europe a great R&D infrastructure. What we have to learn is to make that work more effective and more deliver also in these kind of ventures. Okay, we have in EIT, for example, a program to make sure that universities, but also RTOs, get more eloquent when it comes to supporting a startup and see valuation and societal impact through this route also as a viable option. And if you look at the EIT, I mean, you have the triangle, where at the more traditional universities, you have a combination of education and research, and we add to that really that valorization and business component. And you see that catching up. I mean, we see leading universities. I was also happy to see one of the graphs where you see the impact of universities in the creation of deep tech ventures in Europe really stepping up. So yes, still, if you look, we may have an all-time high of 18% of VC in Europe. First of all, it's relative numbers. Second, you see other parties shrinking. So if others shrink, your relative portion goes up without even doing something. So there still we are faced with the fact that in Europe, this part of the economy is still relatively small. And as a result, the whole economic culture has a different dynamics. And that means that we have to further expand this part of our economy.
Thank you very much. There's a little bit of time left. It was a quick session. What about this idea in Yoram's slides, in one of his slides, that companies are now being overfunded, that they're being asked to scale prematurely? Is this a risk for founders? Is this a lot of pressure to live up to? What do you guys think?
Usually when we raise funds, it's not to travel and to go to holidays or to organize big parties, but rather to invest in R&D. So although with 3 mothers you cannot have a baby in 3 months, if you have sufficient funding, you can also make plan on the longer term. Make sure you can also maybe launch projects before, validate the scale up also before, etc. Will all the money be used the way it should be? Well, most of it will be R&D, so R&D has high failure rate. But I think it's important to be able to plan also on the long term. So I agree maybe on one thing. One should not raise fund for the sake of raising fund and saying, okay, I personally did a 25 million euro round, so I'm a very good founder or whatever. That's the ego should not be in the equation. But I think it's important to support deep tech companies on long term. So bigger round is good, so that companies can plan and hire also talent. That's how you keep people in house, because they know they will have time to grow and reach and some good success in the company.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree. And something I'd like to add to this is, I don't know if companies are overfounded or if startups are tackling bigger and bigger challenges that were previously only reserved to large groups or even states. I mean, when you think about it, building a quantum computer is a quest somewhat as complex, if not more complex, than going to the moon. And yet it's a race only done by private companies, and more than half of them are startups. So this is a huge challenge. Same goes for other very deep tech projects like fusion energy. And so when you tackle larger problems, you need bigger means, and thus you get more. You need more funding. But the price at the end is just scaling with that amount of funding, with the challenge you're tackling. So I guess we're more and more confident that the startup model is a good way to tackle those kinds of problems. And so we're tackling bigger and bigger challenges. But like any other kind of venture, some will succeed, some will fail, but the maths are there. And I think if venture capital is still around and going strong, is because the math is good. So I'm not sure it's overfunded.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what you said. I think what Christoph Jans is referring to is maybe not happening in the deep tech space. I think it's totally justified to put money into it, and it's actually still not enough money almost. And you're tackling complex problems that require capital, but there's a huge outcome. I think what he means is some startups are able to raise maybe more than they need, and they take it, and in 2 years' time that could get them in trouble because maybe the market is not so over-optimistic, and they have to do a smaller round, and their cap table gets really bad, and it's bad for the founder. But that's in specific cases, I think, that are really hot, and maybe that's more happening in SaaS and consumer internet, but deep tech is not there yet. That's my view from outside.
Thank you, Yoram. So I've gone over my time by a minute. I'm maybe going to throw to Emily for the last words. Emily, would you like to give us some predictions to go away with about investment in the next 5 years? Anything you'd like to say?
I think also Willem has been trying to say something quickly, so maybe we can split 30 seconds each.
Yeah, I was trying to say something indeed on the just on to follow up, and then you can close probably to follow up on is there too much money being put? I think it's always wise as a founder and the CEO of a startup to make sure that you do not get overfunded, because it can hit you in later rounds, but it can also lead you to not spending your money wisely. And I think especially in deep tech. Are you overfunded? Has everything to do with, do I have a good use of my money? And I think especially in deep tech, don't underestimate the access to talent part, and hire really the right and the good people. And sometimes, you have this valuation game. I need to become a unicorn. My valuation has to go up fast, and so on and so on. But I think for a deep tech company, it's really very important to have the right people on board. And if you have the possibility to hire a lot of very good people with your money, I mean, ask for the money, because that money will not be lost, because that will be well spent. But if you start to do all kind of other things and you are not able to attract the real people that because that's for deep tech a real differentiator. And that would be my feedback on that question. Sorry about that, but that was piggybacking on previous discussion.
And I'm going to go to Emily now. Emily.
Yeah, I won't try to predict 5 years in the future, and we're already running late. So I'm very biased, I'm aware, but I'll just close on quantum. Quantum is coming. Quantum is already here, so let's all be patient, particularly on that side of the deep tech ecosystem, and all be aware that we all need to upskill to best support our founders in deep tech in particular, and respect the scientific credibility behind it.
Well, brilliant. Thanks for sending us out. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to the Commission for hosting us. Thank you to Auto World. Thank you to the panel. And enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Very much. Have a good day.